returning to the innocence of your childhood, and the things that really did interest you and make you happy. It's beautiful. It's beautiful you can be a sober person and still maintain the childlike joy of life, and that, to me, that's real recovery, when you start to be the person you were when in your youth, and before all that addiction and angst and fear and anxiety and relation, all that stuff happened. It's you get to have that as part of who you are again.
This is the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, presented by Pain, Parents and Addicts in Need. Thank you for listening to Pain's Don't Hide the Scars podcast or watching on our YouTube channel. I'm going to be speaking with a gentleman who's a retired businessman turned author, driven by passion for storytelling and a mission to inspire change. Your book, Terry, I'm going to refer to you as Terry, of course, your pen name, H.W. Terrance, Thirst. It's a fictionalized telling of your story, your recovery around alcohol. I mean, kind of all of it, right? Drugs, alcohol, sex. I mean, what was your business, rock and roll? I mean, that seems to be the only thing missing there.
Yeah, but the book is every chapter is a rock and roll song, named after a song that chronologically was released at the time that chapter happened.
Wow, that is clever. I think the coming across and meeting you, Terry, is I got chills because everybody says, "Oh, you should do your book." I worked in rock radio for 20 plus years, and it's like a movie, and I'm like, I don't want to. I think I should do it fictionally, though.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, "Oh, okay, I guess," and then coming across your story and now you sharing that, I'm like, son of a bitch, Terry's the person I was supposed to meet that's given me approval to do so.
Yes, yeah, please do. Yeah, I had the same quandary. It was like, should I just do this biographically or, tell the actual story? And I thought, it's better. I think it's better to do a fiction, and then I can, I don't have to remember everything exactly, perfectly, and I can, protect the innocent and the not so innocent, and get the story out there, because the message is more important than the telling of my story, so to speak. But it's about our story that hopefully lots of people can relate to.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think that's some of that work that a lot of people do through their recovery journey when it comes to the ego. I wouldn't
Yeah.
need someone to read something and go, "Oh, feel whatever for you," or what. I just need it, hopefully it inspires people, or lets them know they can do this too. And
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I used the pen name, and I stayed anonymous, and I have some, so it's very important to me that I'm not the focus point. I mean, even doing these podcasts, wasn't really for it initially, but I understand it's part of the thing to market the book. So there's no sense having the message if it doesn't get out there. So there's a fine line between anonymous and invisible.
very good point. I've never heard it put that way. That is perfect. If you don't mind, I am kind of curious about you, your journey before we hit record sound. Maybe this landed with you to have a lineage of substance issues within the family. So I just curious about what was childhood for you, and really when did these things kind of start to spike that curiosity? Or I know some people, I wasn't one of them, oddly, but like, ooh, this feeling that the first time I had a drink or a drug or whatever it was, that's it, that's the solution.
Yeah, I didn't think that either. I didn't like the taste of alcohol or anything, but I wanted the effect.
Mm.
So it was, for me, it was, I just wanted to change how I felt, and I grew up in a military home, and with a depressed mother and an alcoholic father, and my mother's father was also an alcoholic, so I had it on both sides. I wasn't really aware of that as a child. I just thought everybody's dad sat in the chair and drank 20 beer every night. But I just kind of grew up lonely, and just felt, not really visible. And so when I first started to drink, it was just that, it just gave me that feeling like I was alive, that I could feel something. And so, that's what I was missing in my childhood. I needed some connection and some feeling, there was an emptiness in me because I just felt unlovable as a child. Not that they did anything bad to me. They just came from their own upbringings where they didn't have love as children. And I did discover that in my journey that it's very generational, and usually pain gets passed on, and so for me alcohol was just an escape from the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure so many people that'll land with, for sure. And, being that you grew up in a military family, was some of that loneliness too? I know any of my friends or family members that were in the military or grew up in a military home, they didn't really get to set any roots for any prolonged period of time. They're changing schools all the time, always being the new kid, having
Yeah.
that best friend that maybe moved away because they're, dad, mom combination thereof got different orders. And so they're, off to a different country or,
Yeah. It was definitely that, and every couple of years we had to move. And so just as I was starting to establish friends and community and feel like I had, a routine that I could grow up in, we dad would come sit on the edge of the bed and say, sorry, son, we're moving, and so I got, it's already the only time he ever came to talk to me. Only time he ever sat on my bed in the morning was we were moving. So, I kind of knew the next couple of times when he came in the bedroom in the morning that my whole life was about to get uprooted. So any girlfriends I had or any best friends or hockey teams, baseball teams, it was all going to get left behind, and I have to go start all over again somewhere completely different culturally and geographically, and it's just drastic changes. Like going from British Columbia to Saskatchewan is like going from California to South Dakota, and it's like you gotta adapt to that new environment and those new types of people, and so yeah, I think I became a good salesman that way because I had to make friends quickly, and I had to sort of size up who the danger was, and all that kind of stuff. So I became hypersensitive, to my environment, but definitely it created a loneliness within me because nothing seemed permanent.
yeah. Well, and you make such a valid point that I think that's why I don't know about you and your the communities that you've built and been a part of through recovery, where I'm hearing more and more people, and hey, I'm one of them. I didn't know till the doctor said it about being hyper vigilant. Like it never occurred to me. I also didn't know till I stopped drinking that I had an anxiety disorder. Like, wait a minute, and then you backtrack. It's like, oh hell, that started way back when I was like 6. Like,
Right,
so
right.
all these things that come into to focus that you start to become self-aware.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jason. Until I put the cork in the bottle, so to speak, and stopped drinking, I didn't have a chance at trying to figure out what was wrong with me before I started drinking. And I started to drink quite young at 14. So I certainly never developed any coping mechanisms, or, I didn't grow up emotionally. And so when I finally did sober up for making a mess of my life, I had to start emotionally all over again, like I was 14, and then start to understand. Oh, there's anxiety here. I don't like going into crowds. I don't like going into restaurants. No wonder I drank every time I went out in public. I didn't like to be out in public. And it took me a long time in sobriety. About 9 years of sobriety to figure out. Oh, I have social anxiety disorder. Because I
Mhm.
went to a psychiatrist. I was like, I'm doing all the steps. I got sponsees. I'm praying. I'm doing all the things, and I still don't want to leave my house. So what's going on? I can go to work because I have a role, but I don't want to do anything social.
Mhm.
And then so like you mentioned, after getting sober, you could start to understand there's other problems underneath that need to be addressed.
I wanted to start this program because many months ago I was dealing with some veterans. I just didn't like the way they were being treated. I didn't like the services that were being provided, for the lack of a better term. I think we need to do a better job with our veterans, and in essence, that's why I decided to start this. My biggest concern with veterans and substance use, especially with opioids, is that they're not getting the proper treatment. And it seems like for years they have not received the proper treatment for that. We decided to make sure that our veterans are going to be able to get the services they need in order to combat their addiction.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised top quality care with programs for detox and patient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living support groups, and more. New Perceptions North provides adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect in a safe, comfortable environment to begin the process of recovery to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction. Call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com. Again, another thing that just lands with me, that role. Like at one point when we're in our drinking career or using career, we kind of know our role, or we're at least subconsciously being driven. But when we're in a state of sobriety and really working it and trying to improve ourselves in a greater sense of consciousness and understanding that it's like, what is my role? Like I still have that at times if it's people that reached out that I used to party with and knew me as the fun guy, so to speak. Like,
Right.
I don't even know what my role would be in this. And when I've gone just uncomfortable, like, you okay? You don't have much to say. It's like, yeah, I don't have anything to say. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not the drunken babbling idiot anymore, you know?
Yeah. Oh, you're just a quiet, nice guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a whole identity that has to get shifted, right? I mean, I was the crazy drunken, party guy, and then when you're sober, you got to learn who you are all over again, and so you're right, Jason. It's a lot of people in early sobriety struggle with that, and they go back to drinking because they're not comfortable with the new self, the real self, the authentic self. They'd rather have the persona, and at least they know who that is, and their friends know who that is, and that's the other danger. You keep the same friends, they want the old self back. They don't want the new guy, and but the new guy is really, it's really the purpose of our life. It's to find that true authentic self and to let it grow up. And so there's some uneasy years in early sobriety where I had to grow up. I had to figure out who I was and which part of my old self was worth keeping and which parts I needed to let go. And so it's redefining yourself all over again, reinventing yourself.
Yeah.
It can be scary.
Yes, but the most worthy endeavor that anyone could take on for a prosperous life, and adding value to others. And let me ask you, you bring up such a good point in what you were sharing there about, some people not liking the new individual. How did you really deal with that, and eventually maybe even decide, well, okay, if you like that other person, you're not going to be a part of my life, or your access is going to be limited. I know for me, the vast majority of people, when I really vocalized, like, I'm not drinking anymore, no thank you, please don't invite me out. Like, for you, I get it's a good time. For me, it's life and death. Right. Most of them went away.
Yes.
Most of them.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, some of the old crew would call me at 2 a.m, and I'd be sober and I'd been in bed since 9 or 10, and they'd call me at 2, like, Hal, where are you? We got the cocaine and the hookers and the alcohol. And you poor bastard, you're sober, and really, I'd hang up and I'd look at my wife and say, I feel so lucky, that I'm not there in the middle of the night, lost, looking for some meaning in life, through drugs and alcohol and sex and all that stuff. So, yeah, those friends fall away if they don't join you in the journey of recovery. They tend to not want to hang around with you because they don't want to change. and uh, and they become boring. You know, the old people become boring to the sober person, because who wants to sit around a bunch of drunken high people all night when you're not? You know, it's you know. So there was a big stage of my recovery where I felt boring.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, I just want to watch TV and eat popcorn like I was 8 years old, you know, and sit in my jammies and, you know, you know, to play road hockey or something. But I started to realize, well, that's a gift, you know, that I got returned to innocence. That, you know, the things that made me happy were simple, and I didn't need to be getting wasted and getting out into chasing other things to be happy. And you know, and then eventually your true natural aspirations kick in, and you start to pursue life, um, you know, as if you weren't an alcoholic or drunk or recovering person. You just start to go after life like you know who you were intended to be
Yeah.
before you got sidetracked by
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyone that I've worked with through their recovery journey, I think you landed on there that return to innocence, so to speak. You know, we're not we're like pumping up Inya here all of a sudden. Return to innocence. Um, was a huge part for me. I mean, literally, I know you can see it, the people listening can't, but if you're watching on the YouTube, you can. You can see the, you know, the Star Wars and Legos and stuff. And this was a big part of it for me. Was, you know,
Right.
one of my
Right.
first sponsees, like, what did you love to do? And we narrowed it down. Ironically, Lego was the most affordable of those things,
Yeah.
but which is still much cheaper than my drinking habit, to
It-
make it clear to people.
it's
And Lego ain't cheap, but he was like, just build something. And I was like, God, my mind was so free in that.
you returning to the innocence of your childhood, you know, and the things that really did interest you and make you happy. It's beautiful. You know, it's beautiful you can be a sober person and still maintain the childlike joy of life, you know, and that to me that's real recovery, you know, when you start to be the person you were when you know in your youth, and before all that addiction and angst and fear and anxiety and relation, all that stuff happened. You know, it's you get to have that as part of who you are again, you know.
Yeah.
So it's not totally your whole life, but you get to still have it. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful, you know. But it is interesting. I was thinking of something we hear you know, I hear a lot in the rooms, is that, you know, when I first sobered up, I wasn't innocent just because I stopped drinking and
Mm.
using. You know, so there's an old saying: if you sober up a drunken horse thief, you have a sober horse thief. And so it's like, you know, when I was first sober, I was still a bad guy. You know, I just wasn't using and drinking. So I had to really learn, how am I going to, you know, how do I get this innocence back? You know, how do I get rid of this evil guy in me that's drawn to sin and drunkenness and adultery and you know, lying and cheating people, and you know, how do I get rid of that guy and bring back that person I was as a youth? And that's the process, you know, that takes time and takes the steps and takes you know, someone to help guide you. But for me, it also really had to come from a higher power. You know, I had to get rid of the ego. And in order for me to get rid of the ego, I had to have something in my life that was more powerful than me. And because up to then I was running the show. And
Right.
so what I had to start to understand was, oh, maybe this faith thing is going to help me get rid of that old bad guy. If I can start to believe there's a God that up there that loves me, that's all powerful, and I can start to try to please that entity or do things as if that entity would want me to do to other people, then I have a reason to change. And you know, not until I started to understand that if I didn't do that, I probably was going to go back to drinking and using. If I didn't start to find that relationship with a higher power and live my life in a way that that higher power was with me, guiding me and helping me and there to forgive me when I misstepped, but redirect me again, and I had to keep working to try to be like my higher power. It gave me a whole new outlook on life, you know, and it took a long time for the old self to die, but my God was patient, and
Yeah.
waited for me.
Yeah.
He loved me as I was, but loved me enough not to leave me that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I get chills. Yeah. Um, couldn't agree more with you, Terry. Just from my own personal experience and seeing it with so many other people that, you can sit and try to refute. And I know that's a struggle for some people. They go, the God aspect, because they immediately think religion, and it's not. That's not.
Right.
It's not what this is. This isn't about the how many Hail Marys you can recollect or whatever other religion that's out. It's not about that. It's about the fact that, from my perspective, as us as a whole being, being mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually sick. But
Right.
if I didn't, like you, dig into what does it mean, what does God mean to me, and being loved by something far greater than I as an individual.
Hmm.
But yet I'm one of those miracles. I forget the number of odds that it is that we're even here and have a life at any point. And
Right.
that my fingertips, my prints are unique to me and will only be this. My retinal scan unique to me. They're even finding the way that we hear is unique to the individual. So it's like everything I see, touch, hear, and say, like all this stuff is unique to me in this one experience.
Yeah.
How is there not something greater than me that is
Right.
loving towards me?
How could that all be random?
Right. And in that's when it started to help me get to where, ooh, all this bull that I've been through, and yes, some of it I was a victim, but I'm not anymore because it had a purpose.
Right.
And I have a purpose.
Right.
That for me was like, that was the bright light, the aha, like, oh,
Right.
all right.
Right. I'm not here by accident. I have something useful I can now do, and because I was always grandiose and wanted to, play in the NHL or rule the world or have all the money or whatever it was. But to be able to find, something meaningful that could help others to be my purpose, it gave my life meaning, and it gave me hope. That thing I never had before. I was a hopeless alcoholic, but to start to think that if I recovered, I could help others recover, that gave me a reason to want to get sober, stay sober, and have a purpose to my life. And that's got really why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I've had this passion for 31 years now, and I just thought, there's a lot of people that don't get to hear the message. That I was lucky enough to get into the doors of AA and heard the message and got my recovery and found my God, and my life went on to great success. But I feel like I was, like you said, I was a lucky person to get that. It wasn't really any doing of my own. It was just that I hit bottom, I failed miserably, and I found my way into the rooms and I stayed. But a lot of people are suffering out there that don't know they can go to those rooms. And I thought, well, maybe if I write a book that's kind of entertaining and yet lays the breadcrumbs out for someone to find their way to the same place I found my way to, then that would be a good thing for me to do, and a good purposeful thing for me to do. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if we can if we can entertain someone in the process of under which they're, under the learning tree at the same time, it's the best way to deliver anything.
right.
Plus, I mean, what a wonderful way to explore your creativity.
Yeah, it was fun. It was work. It was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be, but it was rewarding, to do. But something you said, Jason, I want to touch on too, is that a lot of people in recovery don't have a faith
Mm,
yet, which
mm.
seems funny to me. And I have a lot of friends actually been sober a long time, but they still don't believe in God, and yet they'll say the Serenity Prayer every day. I don't know. I don't know who they're praying to, but I have this one guy in the meeting. He goes, "I'm an atheist. I just say the Serenity Prayer 20 times a day." Okay, well, you're not really an atheist. But anyway, I did dive into this book at the end, the journey to try to find faith,
Mm.
and I hope I did a a good enough job that somebody might put down their skepticism or put down their resistance and try to search for themselves a faith that will work for them. And that's what I hoped I did. So even sober people, I hope will get that out of the book. You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
No matter what in life, it's I'm just picturing this guy saying this Randy prayer 20 times a day. I'm an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, no matter what, it is a worthy endeavor within your life to have such a pursuit,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the questioning thereof. That's why I find it, and I'm not attacking anyone's beliefs, but when I've had people that said that too, I'm an atheist, and then you really have a conversation like, no, that's by definition, that's not what you are.
Yeah.
I hear some fear around the journey, and I
Right.
get it. Like it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you got a problem with God. Well, look at all the stuff you did. God might just have a little bit of a problem with you too, but that doesn't mean that you're not loved because you
Right.
are. That's
Right.
already guaranteed.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting the resistance people have to it, and I think at first I think, well, maybe it's they were, religion has done a lot of has been credited for a lot of bad things, and a lot of religions have been forced on people, and people don't like to be told what they should believe in, and they have a lot of resistance to that. But I think for me, especially, it came down more to a personal um, spiritual pride.
Mm,
I didn't want to surrender to to a God, even if it was my God of my understanding, even if it wasn't the church God or any, even if there's nobody else in the room. I just didn't want to give up my status as God. I wanted to be God, and I didn't have enough humility to say, hey, I'm not God, but there is one. So why don't you try to get to know him and get connected with him and try to find out what he might want for you and let him love you and love him back, and have that whole new relationship start, because in the beginning, if I'm God, I can't have a relationship with God because then I have to admit I'm not God. And I think for me, it was spiritual pride. That's what stood in my way mostly, was just defiance and self-reliance to a fault,
yeah.
where and it failed me. I mean, I ended up a drunk and a loser in life doing it my way. So, I got lucky enough to fail. I got lucky, right? I got lucky enough to fail miserably running the world. So, it became obvious that maybe there was somebody else that was God, not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy. For me, it was definitely ego, but it was the ego. People, you hear ego, you always think it's like the I'm the greatest in the world. No, my ego was I'm the worst in the world, and I'm the greatest, I'm the worst. Neither of them are true or factual in any way
Right.
whatsoever. Um, so it's just like I'm worthless and unlovable. I was Eeyore. I was thanks for noticing me.
Right.
So it's just really getting out of that was important. Um,
Right.
I'd like to ask about, I want to jump way back, you talking about your folks, and it was really interesting to me because you just like, I love my parents. Like I'm the same. Like,
Hmm.
no, things weren't perfect. My mom held it together. My dad had, his issues with substances and other things, and so there was some codependency there of sorts. And, granted, if my parents and your parents' generation where we didn't know what the hell codependency was, and they
Yeah.
saw structures within their childhood of marriage and relationships. And um, when did you kind of have that point of that understanding? Like even though I had a separation from my dad, we have a great relationship now, and that was due to his addiction. Um, I didn't ever not love my parents or wasn't grateful. Like,
Right. Right.
I had it better off than most. My mom was amazing. I've traveled the world and done so many wonderful things. And I know that was on not only her hard work, but my dad's, and so much
Hmm.
opportunity. So it's like, I don't know. I just love and adore my parents despite any of
Yeah,
the
and I think
shortcomings.
recognizing childhood trauma and where our parents were human and failed us it doesn't have to be the same as not loving and respecting and being grateful for them giving us life and an upbringing in a home and doing the best they could with what they knew.
Hmm.
I think both are true at the same time, and that's the tricky thing is to say, I still honor my parents and love my parents, but I have to be honest about what I experienced growing up and how I dealt with it or how I didn't deal well with it, and I think a lot of, if my parents missed something, I think it was just supporting me emotionally through life's trials and tribulations. And because they were not supported emotionally by their parents, neither one of them my dad came from a broken family and had a stepfather, didn't like him, and left home at 14. And my mom had an alcoholic father returned from World War II and beat her mother. And, she left home at 15. So they both had, really no father figure, no structure or love or support in their home. So they didn't know how to do it. They just didn't know how. And so when I hit things in life that, a healthy parents could coach you through and say that's, it's not that important. You failed, but you'll get up. You'll be okay. Things will move on. Instead of that, they were just not there for me, and so I turned to alcohol, and that's in the book. But I think it's important to go back and look. I think early in sobriety, I did a family tree, and I found out my dad's dad, I was always told was somebody else, and I found out I had a grandfather biologically that was my dad didn't acknowledge. And so when I went and found that man, and he was a wonderful man, but my dad didn't want that relationship with him because he was very close to his mother, and his mother had told him he was a bad guy and had to go away, and so she could have new men in her life, and she was an alcoholic, and so you just go back and see all this broken family secrets and sins of a father delivered upon the son. So it's not it's generational. The pain is the pain is generational. So aren't we the lucky ones that we can stop it and get healthy, get good with God, get forgive our parents, work through our own trauma, become healthy, giving, loving people, and be good to our kids so they don't have the same generational trauma passed on to them.
Yeah.
That was one of the most beautiful things for me is, my youngest son never saw me drunk, and he's 35 now. So it's sobriety is a beautiful thing to give as a gift to your family.
Yes. Yes, it is. And to start building a different way of lineage of doing things for sure. And it's interesting where you talk about like with your grandma that she had issues with alcohol too, and the biological grandfather was the bad guy. And maybe people hear that and they might go, oh, well, there's some big lie there. And no, the reality for a lot of us when we are addicts is all the stuff that we might say or whatever, it's true for us in our mind.
Right.
So it's like these things where these things, from above a scope, you can sit and go, well, that was a lie, that was a lie. And the reality is, no,
Yeah.
no, there's just a dysfunction here that created a perception, and perception being reality for the
Right.
individual. And this is how these things go. It's like, that's
Right.
one individual could be the most kind, loving person, but the addict walks all over him, or goodness
Yeah.
forbid, if you got two addicts together, holy jeez, okay,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
get the rolling here.
Yeah. And the stories we tell ourselves in order to cope with our
Mm,
reality, like you're saying, we can tell ourselves lies and believe them because we need to believe that in order to justify ourselves, or in addiction and in alcoholism. We believe all kinds of lies, and see ourselves in ways that aren't true, but we need to in order to continue the disease, to continue the behavior. And so that's the bottom for a lot of people, for like, I love that saying is that, I hit bottom when my standards fell faster than my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Because my behavior would slowly go down as I was drinking. And, I'd drink in a nice bar, then I'd drink in a not so nice bar, then I'd be drinking with the rubbies at the alcoholic bar, and as long as I did that progression, I dropped my standards faster than I dropped my behavior. But when I would do something that I actually felt shame for, and for me, until, because I was really shameless, I could do all kinds of things and not feel shame. So I had to finally do enough things at the end of my drinking career that I felt shame. And that shame was my catalyst to say, oh my goodness, I have done something and doing things that I'm ashamed of, and I want forgiveness. I don't like how I feel. I'm full of guilt and shame, and that's a bad place to be when you're drinking and using. If you start to hate yourself and feel full of guilt and shame, then you just drink more and use more, and you just want oblivion. And you just want to kill yourself, and that brings on, hopefully, the turning point of saying, okay, well, if I don't want to die, I need to go and get help. I need to go get help dealing with this shame and this self-hatred and these underlying reasons of why I'm drinking myself to death or using drugs till I die, and going in and getting that counseling through a treatment center or through AA meetings or through psychiatry, psychology, getting somebody on the outside to help us deal with that shame, I think, is the key to begin your recovery.
Yeah. Well, I think yes. And I think the big part of it, I know, and I want to ask you, your process of asking for help. Yeah, it's that asking for help is such a huge part of it. I don't know about you. I was pretty much by the end of my run in solitude. I had there was no more seedy bars. There was no more women to co-sign my bullshit. There was
Right.
none of it, and it just was, unfortunately, my children didn't have the same experience as your youngest, but it was just yeah, it was a cry out to God. It was like, please just present me something for help.
Right.
Um and boy, it came. Like, I
Uh-huh.
didn't directly ask. Like, I didn't ask directly to a person.
Uh-huh.
It was a person who knows, loves me, and went, "Hey, I've taken some people to their first meeting." What?
Uh-huh.
Wait, you have an issue? No, I don't have an issue, but I've
Yeah.
still taken people and connected them to communities. Would you
Cool.
like some help? And it was like, yes,
Very cool.
yes.
Yeah. I was court ordered my help, but
What a favor!
yeah. It was like, well, you could go to jail or you could go to treatment. You take your pick. So, luckily I had a wise judge. Maybe he had experience in his own life, but he saw me as a sick person, not an evil person, even though I was doing evil things and I was doing bad things. He saw me as a sick person that could get better if he treated the disease, and that was an awakening to me, because I didn't believe that it was changeable. I knew I was an alcoholic, but I didn't think that was a changeable thing. I just thought that that's my fate. I'm gonna die before I'm 30 of alcoholism, like millions have done before me, and I didn't think there was a way out. I didn't think that I could actually choose recovery. It was a mind blowing thing for me. It was like, really, I can just choose not to drink, and I can find a group of people that will support that and help me show me a way that could be a reality for me. It was mind blowing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's what, yeah. I recently was talking with a young man and he was talking about, court situations. And I'm like, listen to that judge. I'm like, you better, because that judge clearly understands that something has a hold over you and sees something underneath. If that judge says eat lima beans every day, you eat lima beans every day because you are given that chance. Because there's going to be two ways of you getting
Right.
sober. It's either you take all this that's being told and put in front of you, and you do every step with a yes sir, yes ma'am, or
Yeah.
you're going to be locked up and you're not going to
Yeah.
have a choice. Or
Yeah.
even worse, you'll be locked up somewhere. Well, you'll be able to become a better addict and you'll never come out of that place.
Right. Right. So he's like me. He was lucky. He was kind of forced into it, but in the end, you still have to choose to stay. And you
Yes.
have to choose to do the steps, and you have to choose to take part, and you have to choose to try and reach out to that higher power and say, help me stay sober today, one day at a time. And I've been saying that for a long time now, so I think it's working.
Yes, sir. Terry, I want to ask you, with you mentioning that, some of those early phases, a lot of people that when they're new to recovery, the idea of a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, or the rest of their life is really daunting. How did you really start to embrace one day at a time and what it actually really means? I think there's a lot of misconceptions around that.
Yeah. I For me, I came out of treatment and I didn't stay sober. I got drunk every 3 months. I'd drink again, 6 months, drink again, 3 months, drink again, 6 months, drink again. So it took me 3 years. And on my last drink, I was so devastated that I drank again after all the wreckage I'd caused and all the second chances, third chances, fourth chances my wife gave me. To be drunk again was so devastating to me that I'd been to enough AA meetings that I heard, this old guy had lost his voice to cancer, and he used to put one of those electric things to his voice, and they'd say, "Jim, you got anything to say today?" And he'd say, "Get on your knees and pray for sobriety." That's all he'd say. And so that morning, when I woke up so full of remorse and the disillusionment, I decided I was going to try this prayer thing, and I got on my knees and it was so uncomfortable, but I just said, help me today, help me stay sober today. And so what I started to understand was that I needed to say that prayer every morning because it only lasted a day, that I could turn my will over for a day. But the next morning I woke up with my own will again. And so if I wasn't willing that morning to say, help me stay sober today, God, there was a good chance I was going to drink or use that day. And I'd shown that in my past, that I wasn't able to stay sober. So living one day at a time for me means asking God to keep me sober today, each day, each and every day. And also that I shouldn't get too far in the future or into the past, because the past is regret and the future is fear. And when I let my mind go backwards or forwards, I lose my peace of mind, and I lose the awareness that God exists, God loves me, and everything's okay. And fear takes over, fear or regret, and I lose the day. I lose myself, and I lose the ability to be of use to others. To be there to comfort my children, or help my wife, or be a good guy at work, or help another alcoholic, or as soon as I get lost into the future or into the past, I'm no longer useful today. And so I have to try and stay one day at a time emotionally. I still plan financially for the future and make trips and plans for trips in the future, but I try to live spiritually and emotionally in the moment. Like Eckhart told, power now, like stay here and that here, and keep my head where my feet are.
Yeah.
Stay in the present, and yeah, and that's the gift, the present.
Yep. I Once again, I got long sleeves on. You can't see it. Chills. Exactly. It's like just being there, and it's not like, I don't know about you. I don't have bad days anymore. I have tough things that occur within my day, but
Right,
I don't really have like bad days. And
right,
and I'm sure things are going to come up and I'll have to question that again, but I'll do it within that present time.
right.
And that's the whole thing about how can we just embrace this day. I don't know about you, when I've reflected on the past, and I try to use anything where a past memory comes up as a teachable thing for myself, or maybe it's something I need to share with somebody else for their benefit. It doesn't mean I don't have emotions around it, but I realize those emotions are in the present of a story that occurred when it's the story I'm telling myself about it, because that may not be it at all. I don't know how many times I've brought stuff up to my brother and he's like, dude, what the hell are you talking? That's not even what
That's not what
happened.
happened.
Like, really? What happened? Who
Yeah,
was this person? Like, that
yeah,
person didn't even exist in our family. You must have been so little that I like amalgamize people or whatever.
right, right.
And with the anxiety, it was so much about the future. And it's not that like, hey, I'm not saying like, boy, I've got this down pat. My anxiety's gone away. What I've got is a greater set of tools and a community that I can reach out that can help me come back to center so much quicker. And especially all that for me starts with God.
Yeah. And I like you said that even during the day, I can restart my day. Some days I get way off track and I get into anxiety or I get into regret. And I can always just stop and say, say a little prayer and just say, God, take this away from me. Or, God, give me my peace back, and let me be of service. Let me do your will. Thy will, not mine, be done. Just that quick prayer of remembering that I'm here to do God's will now. And that's the gift I've been given, not the task. And that I get to do God's will instead of my own, because my own will gets me in trouble and gets me in fights with people and gets me in conflicts and gets me miserable. And when I try and do God's will, I get happiness, I get connection, I get friends, I get purpose, and I get hope, and I get peace.
Yeah.
Peace be with you,
Yeah.
And so it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful way to live. I wish I was taught it younger. But my dad used to say you can't put an old head on young shoulders. So sometimes you just got to go through stuff and learn it. And I'm just grateful that I finally hit bottom hard enough that I had the willingness to try to change.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I wanted to close on a couple of things. One of those being, you've mentioned your wife and her love and grace and forgiveness. For a lot of people that listen to our podcast are the families that come through the doors of pain, parents and addicts in need, as well as the loved one that is suffering that after and in their recovery process. What was that process of rebuilding that trust like, if you have any recollection? Oftentimes, we tell everyone, hey, you're going to have to get just engaged in the recovery process as your loved one, because the whole paradigm of the family is going to have to shift in a
Right.
healthy way. And it doesn't mean it's comfortable, but in a healthy way.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife is a very strong-minded person, and she, she made it clear right at the beginning that she wasn't going to change her lifestyle for me. And that so she kept alcohol in the house, and she still had her glass of wine in the evening, or half a glass of wine, as the non-alcoholics drink. They leave alcohol in the glass, but she made it clear that if I had the problem, not her, and I had to learn to accept her as she was, and her early recovery, I was crazy. I was full of piousness. I was full of, you need to come to meetings with me and all this stuff. And the truth of it was that I needed to change, and mostly I needed to quit trying to change her and the family. I had to just worry about changing me, and that was really all I had control over. I trying to change other people was pretty frustrating because we don't have the power to do that. So I learned in AA, I had to try to be a servant in my own home. And I had to learn that. That because I came into the marriage thinking, you're the woman, you cook, you clean, you look after everything, and I set the rules, and I had to grow up and realize it was a partnership, and that I was going to be free if I stopped trying to dictate how everyone should live in the house, and I could start to try to serve them. So
Mm.
doing things like taking my kids, a dinner into their bedroom instead of screaming at them to come to the table, or going and getting their dishes for them instead of, yelling at them or kicking them in the butt to bring their dishes to the kitchen. Like simple things like that, where I just started to be of service, be a servant to my family, freed me from the anger, that I had so much anger about controlling, trying to control everybody, get them to do what I thought they should be doing. So for me, it was a lot about that. It's just, learning, learning that it was better to give than receive, the St. Francis prayer, and learning, just learning to be a loving person instead of being so judgmental of them, and just to be supportive of them and just to hear them instead of try and fix them, things like that, so, my wife did her own journey and and she was already a good person, so she had a lot less of a journey to make than I had to. And my kids, God bless them, they've forgiven me and they're all part of my life, and my grandkids are all part of my life today. And God has restored the family. But the early years are not easy. But and I ran away a lot. I was a child. If I didn't get my way, I would leave home, but I would get a mile from the house and then feel the aloneness set in,
Mhm.
and call her on a payphone. We had payphones back in those days. I'd go and put a quarter in and dial her up and say, "Can I come home?
uh,
I'm sorry,"
uh,
and so I had a lot of that stuff where I had to grow up, and just couldn't deal with my feelings. I was one to fight or flight all the time, and so just trying to get through those early years and have the family understand that alcoholic is like a child when they first sober up. They need lots of patience and tolerance, as long as they're trying to get better. I think if they're not trying to get better, they need to get gone. But if they're trying, if they're going to meetings, if they're saying they're sorry when they screw up, if they're trying to get better, it's so important to be patient with them, because they do get better. They do grow up. People do grow up quickly in recovery, but they need a few years
yeah.
to get their legs under them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We've depending on when we started and what it is, substance wise or any other kind of addiction for that matter, we've cut some maturity rates in half, and it's going to take a while to process, especially for those of us that started well before our brain was mature, around 25, 26 years old. It's going to take a while. There's a catch up that comes along with it.
There is, yeah, and luckily, us alcoholics and addicts usually pick saintly people to be our partners, people who will put up with us if we're willing to show that we're serious and put our action. We're not just saying we're sorry, but actually doing what it takes to get better. Going to meetings and helping others and praying and reading the books and living the life of sobriety.
Yes, sir. Terry, if you'd like to share, please, just, little synopsis on the book, best way to get Thirst, and, I'll make sure that link's in the podcast description.
Oh, thanks, Jason. Yeah, it's called Thirst by H.W. Terrance, and it's a little story about childhood and then adolescence and alcoholism, drug addiction, and then the long road to recovery and the journey to find faith that works. And it's spoiler alert, it's got a happy ending, but it takes a long time to get there. And hopefully, I wrote it in an entertaining way that you'll enjoy the journey, and it's easy to read. And if you know anyone who's struggling or has a loved one who's struggling, if they could read this book, I'm sure it'll give them some hope and some direction to how to find recovery. You can find the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or Kindle. And I really appreciate you having me, Jason. And you're a good guy. I can feel you're a heart-centered, service-centered guy too. So I've really enjoyed my time with you.
Thank you, and likewise, been an absolute pleasure. We'll have to do something again down the road here, and just have a conversation. We could just pick a topic and go for sure. Thank you, of course, for listening to Pains Don't Hide the Scars. Please give the podcast a follow on whatever platform you're on, a rating and review. Don't forget, we all are also on YouTube. If you'd like to watch along, that's youtube.com/@PainNonProfit. And thank you for listening to the podcast.